Real Time Review. I'm your host, Jesse Nussman. With me, as always, fellow Atlanta film critic Jason Evans. Jason, as we're approaching the holiday season, we have all the Hollywood studios are frantically rushing to dump everything out before the end of the year. So we have
awards contenders.
The awards
the
contenders.
Important films. It's a fun time of year, although I know you and I have been watching movies like non-stop.
Yes. We've gotten all the screeners in the mail and compiling our critics' top 10 lists. I think it's appropriate that the first movie we're going to talk about this week that's coming out this weekend is one of the more acclaimed movies of the fall festival season. It's Poor Things, which I feel like I would describe to most people who haven't seen a trailer for this movie, or maybe have seen a trailer and are like, what on God's green earth is this thing I'm looking at? It's kind of like if you were to take Frankenstein, cast Emma Stone in the monster role, and turn it into this like wild, erotically charged, like over-the-top comedy, essentially.
So the thing, I was talking to my wife about this film, and she's go, "What that movie about?" And I said, "Imagine if Frankenstein was an attractive woman who was sex crazed but didn't know what she was doing."
Right, or even the other sort of comparison I've heard is this is, quote, Weird Barbie the movie, and that like it is a story about a fictional woman character sort of coming to terms with like what does it mean to be a woman in the world, what does it mean to be a human being. But obviously this is not a bright piece of colorful pop IP. This is a Yorgos Lanthimos movie, so it is like very silly. It's very strange. There's like a little bit of like a Terry Gilliam influence to it with a lot of I mean,
there's
I thought
a lot of
Terry
Gilliam
in
yeah,
here.
if you're someone who loves Brazil and Terry Gilliam's films,
yeah,
you're going to feel a lot of that in this.
But I think for as weird as we're making this movie sound, I think it is like fairly approachable. Like the comedy in it is broad enough that I think like this is not one of those movies where you need to know like 15 literary references in order to understand the humor of the movie. It's a pretty broad screenplay, a lot of like very goofy, absurd comedy if you like Monty Python stuff, or even if you like something like Anchorman, like it's in that kind of like over the top absurd
Mark Ruffalo's
comedy.
character, that's a great analogy. Mark Ruffalo's character in this film could be right out of Anchorman. He is over the top with his humor. It's very relatable. It's easy to enjoy. Yeah, I think it's a fun film. Yeah,
I had a blast watching it. I think I don't love it quite as much as some of Yorgos Lanthimos' other movies, and maybe that's me being someone who is there from the very beginning with like Dogtooth and stuff. So maybe I want,
He's done some weird stuff.
I'm the person who like went and saw like Killing of a Sacred Deer and was like the lone person in the theater laughing. So like I'm used to the kind of like raw, untapped Yorgos Lanthimos.
Well, the Yorgos film that I think mainstream audiences will have seen is The Favorite, which was a very successful Oscar film.
Right. I
don't know that this is quite up to the quality of The Favorite.
But notably the same writer as it, who also is creator.
And same star,
right.
Emma Stone. Yeah.
It's Emma Stone. I just think this is kind of like a delightfully really funny movie. I think it is one of the most like purely enjoyable things I've seen this year. If I have maybe one nitpick, I think the movie overstays its welcome maybe just by like 20 or 30 minutes, which sounds super nitpicky, but the best way I could describe it is I just kind of like reached a point with sort of the final act of the movie where I was like, I get it. Like I get what Lanthimos and Emma Stone and everyone involved in this movie is sort of spinning in the kind of story they're trying to tell about, discovering what it means to be a person and kind of getting a lot of the absurd humor with the kind of like wild sex jokes or like animals that have been like re-engineered to like it's a pig's head on like a chicken's body or something like that in the mad scientist house. But you bring up Mark Ruffalo. I mean, him and Emma Stone in this movie I think are both
so great,
hysterically funny. Mark Ruffalo basically playing this kind of like, he's kind of like Pepe Le Pew.
If he came to life, I like that.
If he came
That's
to
good.
life and is just sort of like this kind of like, buffoonish cad who's trying to like sweep the Emma Stone character off her feet.
And then falls for her and doesn't know what to do when he's in love.
Right, exactly. Yeah, so I would say I don't know that I would put this on the same kind of masterpiece level as a lot of our other kind of critics colleagues out there, but I found it a really funny comedy to sit through, and I'm always going to be someone who kind of like dials into Yorgos Lanthimos' sense of humor.
I mean, it's decidedly weird. There's no question about that. But it's also, as you say, very enjoyable, very funny. To me, one of the biggest takeaways was I thought Emma Stone had an incredibly brave performance. I think she's going to be a leading Best Actress contender as a result of this role. It's a film where for a solid 30, maybe 45 minutes, she's like naked and having sex and doing things that we can't talk about.
Yes. But I mean, even beyond that, I mean, just the level of cartoonish absurdness and the willingness as an actor to like I'm just gonna kind of like cut loose and be goofy, and there's these like weird sets around me, and I'm wearing like goofy costumes, and I'm having
walking and moving strangely.
Right.
She's learning how her body operates.
Yeah.
I think it's a very, very brave performance on her part.
Mm-hmm.
And the important thing to me about all the sex, and again, there's a lot of sex in this film, is that I actually thought it was necessary. It's not titillating. It's not done like, hey, here's a chance to see Emma Stone's breasts or anything like that.
Right.
It is really about developing the character and how the character understands humanity. And so I appreciate it in that regard.
So the next movie that we're going to talk about is one of your favorites of the year, which is American Fiction, which is rolling out in the next couple weeks. I first started hearing about this movie I was at the Toronto International Film Festival.
It took the festival by storm,
yeah,
didn't it?
it was kind of I missed it at the festival, but it was sort of like the buzz on the ground of everyone really liking this movie. It won the People's Choice Prize of it. Do you care to give us kind of like a brief description of it?
Yeah, so Jeffrey Wright plays an author named Monk, and he's an African-American author who has written a number of smart, interesting, very well-crafted books that have not been very successful. And he becomes disenchanted with the fact that white America wants to hear about a black experience that is not the experience he grew up with. They want to hear about urban, inner city, drug use, violence, all that other kind of stuff. And so just on a whim, because he's angry, he writes the most over-the-top, absurd, stereotypical black story that he thinks is a joke, and it turns out to be really, really successful. And then he doesn't know how to deal with that because it's the opposite of the story he wanted to tell.
I think part of my trepidation with this movie, I think you described kind of one half of it, because then the other half of the movie is it kind of just becomes this sort of like...
It's a story of his family
right.
and such, but I think that, I get you're about to say you didn't enjoy that part. I thought, look, with a movie like this, it would have been easy to just make it about the racial tension that is at the heart of the movie. I don't know that would have had the movie last and keep my attention for the entire runtime. By injecting the story of his family, we get to know them as characters. We get a incredible performance, I think, by Sterling K. Brown.
He is very funny.
He is great in everything, and he is fabulous in this movie. We just get involved with Monk's life more than we would otherwise. And to me, I actually think that's one of the strong points of the movie. It has a message, but there's also characters.
Yeah, I think so. Maybe the kind of take that I was hinting at earlier is, I think the satirical aspect of this movie is so sharp and so insanely funny and so incredibly creative, and the sort of
you wanted more of it.
Right. It almost, comparing it to what we just talked about, Poor Things, is like in admiring the sort of willingness of Poor Things, just like we're just jumping into full-on absurdity. And I kind of wish this movie would just sort of lean into just sort of like the kind of craziness that the meta commentary gets into it. Which
it is playing a game,
right.
Because you're right, that meta commentary, whatever you want to call it, the racial tension is presented a good bit over the top, and then you have this very grounded, very real human story of the family, and I can see how someone might say these don't necessarily mesh together. Again, it worked for me.
Yeah.
This film's one of my top 5 films of the year.
Okay.
But maybe not for you. I can understand that.
I would say it's still worth seeing, because I think the satire stuff in it is so good and so sharp and so funny and so ironic for us to, as two white guys, be talking about.
Yeah, right, exactly. Are we qualified?
But I don't think the family drama stuff is necessarily bad. It's not like like an oil and water ratio of, it's just sort of like anytime it cut back to that section of the movie, I was sort of like, I had the opposite reaction of you. It was like, I'm less interested in this. It was like, go back to, I want to live in the kind of like adaptation world of this movie, where it is just sort of like, let's do kind of like a crazy meta plunge into like what it's like to put a work like out there into the world and get into all the crazy contradictions and political stuff.
My bottom line is that it's a film that I think audiences will enjoy tremendously. And it's at the same time, it's a film that has some interesting things to say about society. That kind of mix doesn't happen all that often. And so I think it's a film worthy of great praise.
So the last one we want to talk about is not coming out until Christmas, but it is one I have been talking about on numerous episodes. I've been so excited to see it. It is Michael Mann's Ferrari movie. Michael Mann, a filmmaker I am minorly obsessed with. I'm a Michael Mann stan. I think even his bad movies are kind of interesting. And this has been a passion project of his for decades at this point. It's now finally on the big screen. Adam Driver playing Enzo Ferrari. It's not kind of your stereotypical Hollywood biopic. It's really sort of concentrated to this stretch of months. I think it's maybe like a year in the life of Enzo Ferrari.
Yeah, 1957, I think it is.
Right.
Yeah.
And, I think your expectations are going to kind of weigh into what you think of this movie. I think people going in do not expect this to be like Ford versus Ferrari or like a sports movie.
Yeah.
It is a movie about the sports car industry, but it is not about like the actual act of racing. There are amazing race sequences in it.
The final third of the film has the race that is the center of the plot to some extent. I actually have a problem with the plot. I think that the plot is a little too all over the place.
Yeah.
But the racing scenes they're really great. I mean, Michael Mann is a director who all of his films look incredibly gorgeous. I just think this one is to me, this is the bottom half of his catalog.
Interesting.
And it's an important catalog. He's done some great work in the past. I just think the story, I say this all the time, I'm a slave to story, and to me, the story, there were so many times in this film I was like, wait, which character is that? And why does this matter? And they're fighting now, and why? And I just didn't understand what was going on, but it's gorgeous to look at and some good performances for sure.
Yeah, I think for me, this really fits into kind of this overarching kind of archetype that Michael Mann has been dealing with for so many of his films. A lot of the characters in his films are obsessed with their profession, and that obsession sort of prevents them from having any kind of relationships in life, whether it's romantic relationships, whether it's family relationships. And in a lot of his movies, that means that his characters sort of live this monk-like existence. If you think of like Robert De Niro's character in Heat, or James Caan in Thief, or any of the characters in Miami Vice. And this is a movie where the central drama is a guy who probably should be living that lifestyle, but thinks like, no, I can obsess over my job and sort of carry all this drama in my personal life and it all be fine. And the whole movie is really this juggling act of Enzo Ferrari trying to manage the company, which is on the verge of bankruptcy. They need to win like one race in order to get the amount of money to keep the company alive.
Although the movie doesn't do a good job of explaining why. I mean, like the stakes are explained, but the resolution of how this all works together, to me, didn't come together. But continue. Sorry.
I think for me, it's less kind of understanding the machinations of how, they're able to keep the company alive, and more of the idea of this is a man who's trying to just keep a juggling act going. I'm trying to juggle this business along with my estranged wife, who's I thought amazingly played by Penelope Cruz in the movie, who owns half the company. He also has a mistress played by Shailene Woodley, a performance I would say does not work at all, but nonetheless.
Was she supposed to be Italian or American?
I believe she's supposed to be Italian, but that accent is really coming in and out of the movie.
Yeah, it's not necessarily happening.
And juggle this side family he has with her, and it really just being about like the hubris of this guy, and the whole movie you feel like you're watching, bit of a pun intended here, an inevitable car crash that's about to happen. The drama of the movie is how long is he going to go? How long is this going to last before things inevitably are going to spiral out of control and someone's going to be hurt, whether it's in their personal life or, as we see, I think, brilliantly in the racing sequences, like the drama of those racing sequences isn't so much like who's going to make it to the finish line in time. It's like, these are rocket ships that people are just stepping into, and if you make like one slight miscalculation, like you've not only killed yourself, but have probably killed like several other people that are just standing on the sideline. And I just sort of got so wrapped up in this movie as this sort of like, what must it be like to be obsessed with this profession, with this the hobby, anything in your life that is like dangerous and consuming, and like, how does that affect the people around you and ultimately just sort of like make your life spiral into chaos? I found this to be like a really moving and kind of like beautiful to look at movie. Again, I'm coming at this as a bit of a Michael Mann fanboy, but I think like, even if you want to throw some shades at kind of like some of the bad casting, like I'm sure the Adam Driver performance will be a little divisive amongst people. I thought he was great in the movie. I think it is an example of like, sure, he's maybe miscast as an Italian man in his 50s, but I think finds like a real pathos and emotional center to that character that really made me care for him.
He delivers his lines really nicely, and he has some really interesting lines. Look, to me, the thing about the film, and again, it's not a bad movie by any stretch of the imagination. And if you're someone who enjoys Michael Mann or is into the auto racing sort of aspect of the historical aspect of this stuff, absolutely. But for general audiences, there are a lot of characters in this movie, and I kept on having trouble figuring out who was who and why they mattered and all this other kind of stuff. I watched this on a DVD, a screener copy that I had at home, and I probably paused it about 5 or 6 times to get out my phone and check Wikipedia and be like, okay, what's happening now and who's this character and why they matter. That enhanced my understanding of the film, but I realized if I was watching it in a theater, I would have been like, wait, Patrick Dempsey's character? Who?
Yeah.
What's he doing here? And there are 4 other drivers and it's just, again, I don't think they spent enough time focused on characters or story. Like, I think back to some of Michael Mann's, but like Last of the Mohicans, which is one of his best films. I love the fact that I feel like that's a pretty pared down number of characters. I knew everybody that were major characters in that story, and everything else didn't matter. And in this film, I don't feel like I had that same sense. There were side characters coming in all the time. In fact, side characters who we need to care about for us to understand what's happening toward the end. And I was like, I barely know who you are. And to me, that's a problem.
And I think as much as the audience might want us to be like going at each other's throats, like this is to me like the exciting thing about what we do and film criticism is kind of we're sort of saying the same things and kind of like the things that to you, I don't disagree with any of the things you say like don't necessarily work about the movie. And yet for me, the pleasure of it was sort of like being so absorbed into this world and all the like, you know, men going around in their like black sunglasses and their like 4-piece suits, and I'm just sitting on the couch like pour me a Negroni and just like let's go, and just sort of like absorbed in the whole kind of like aesthetic of the movie is something that really like took me away.
So I will say that when this comes on cable, streaming, whatever you want to call it, I will probably tune in if it's in the final half hour, because the racing stuff toward the end is really great.
Yeah.
There was one point toward the beginning of the major race where the cars are going by and Michael Mann, I'm sure they were doing a drone shot or something, pulls way back and you see the entire Italian landscape.
Cinematography in this movie is unreal.
Yeah, I said to my wife, I go, this is Michael Mann flexing. Like this is just, it's some great stuff.
Yeah.
But that's not enough to carry a movie that's over 2 hours long.
Well, Jason, it's a pleasure as always having you here. We will discuss more of the Christmas season movies as they roll out, including Color Purple, The Return of Willy Wonka, and the
Aquaman.
Return of Aquaman. Yeah.